thinking about it this morning, listening to the other speakers, and last night. And Renee, of course, put the program together. I don't believe she knew what was the contents of our talks, but they are just flowing one into the next, and it's just incredible. Richard talked about the flower, and I'm going to do that. That's where he ended, I will continue. So anyway, it's incredible to me. It's kind of all of a piece. And Diana is truly the most loving person I have ever met. So.
If I weren't married to Michelle, we'd be engaged.
Actually, what she's not telling you is that we have been engaged for almost 40 years. Have you ever watched a flower grow? We can see that it has grown. We can see the difference as it turns its face toward the sun throughout the day and closes up at night. But we can't actually see it doing so. We can see the change in its height or the length of a vine in a day, a week, or a season. But we never actually see the stem growing or the vine moving. I have often marveled about this process and our inability to watch it. Sometimes photographers have used film that is speeded up to show us the action of the flower or the vine. Many of us have probably seen this on TV or in documentaries where the flower just totally opens up right before your very eyes. It's incredible. Then we can see the flower bursting into bloom and the strength and aggressiveness with which the vine works its way out of the soil or even pushes its way through concrete to reach the sunlight. It's amazing. A seed is planted, watered, and placed in the sunlight. Somehow it knows to split open under the ground, From that, a little stem is formed that reaches down into the soil to form roots and up, forming leaves and continuing to grow to a full-sized plant or even 100-foot-tall tree. All of this is happening around us all of the time, but we can't see it as it happens, not with our physical eyes, because our brains cannot comprehend this extremely slow movement. Does this mean it isn't happening? Of course not. We see the results, so we know that the plant is growing. We just can't see the process while it is taking place. Conversely, I remember going to a seminar where we were to get in touch with the trees. If anybody knows Dora Kuntz from the United States, that was one of her, let's get in touch with this. Several of the participants reported that they got the impression that the trees were aware of us only as extremely fast-moving objects that were perhaps a little bothersome, like gnats might be to us, you know. Otherwise, our worlds did not interact from their point of view. How does a plant know to grow? How does it know the process by which it will come to maturity? Is there a school for seeds? Is there some form of education they go through, a K through 12 for sprouting, making leaves, flowers, fruits, decaying, and using stored up nutrients for next year's flowers? No. All of this knowledge is inherent in each and every seed. Somehow there is a form of consciousness that connects them all and of which they are entirely unaware, at least I think they're unaware. I am not a botanist, but I'm sure there is no botanist who knows the impetus that makes a flower grow and bloom. They know the components of the plant, its life cycle, what we can do to help it grow, how to clone it or hybridize it, but no one knows exactly why or how it knows to grow. What causes the process? Or what ties all the many kinds of plants together in their knowledge of how to mature and continue their life year after year? This simple example gives a good argument for the existence of a universal consciousness that oversees all. Not just plants, but minerals, animals, and human beings as well. Now, as you undoubtedly realize, the processes I've spoken about take place on the physical level of our existence. Therefore, it's just the start of a discussion of consciousness. Human beings, as our Theosophical studies tell us, have a sevenfold constitution: physical, etheric, astral, lower and higher mental, Buddhic, and Atmic. Therefore, human beings who exist on emotional, mental, and spiritual levels, as well as the physical, share a universal consciousness, often called unity or oneness, that is the source of our being and our ultimate goal as well, as we progress through life and our various incarnations. Is the flower conscious of the physical process it goes through? No. No more than we are conscious of our hearts beating, our lungs inhaling and exhaling, the blood coursing through our veins, or the growth of the fetus in the mother's womb. These processes go on without our conscious direction or intervention. Of course, medical science has learned much of these processes and has found ways to alter them, often to our benefit. But that is not the topic of this conversation. For our purposes, suffice it to say that we are unconscious of these processes as they are happening. As we mature and grow, we can become conscious of our emotional and mental processes. We can learn to control our emotions, to raise them to a level that is more acceptable to whatever society we live in than the base instincts we share with other animals. We can learn to control our desires and our ways of reacting to stressful circumstances, and are encouraged to do so by civilized society. We can replace base desires with higher aspects of emotion, replacing lust with love, for example. And we can learn to understand certain situations without becoming angered by them, or by finding more acceptable outlets for our anger than acting on it. Of course, it is at the mental level that human beings are really separated from lower animals. And it is here that we really hit our stride. From childhood, we are taught many facts about how this works and that came to be. We learn reading, writing, mathematics, and science, all the basics of the physical universe, how it began and how it operates. This is the realm of the lower mental that helps us to reason and think logically. All the while, many of us are striving to know more. Our intellect, our higher mind, looks for concepts beyond mere logic and reason. We see our lives and ourselves from a physical perspective, but somehow we know that there is more. This very fact is what drew many of us to Theosophy in the first place. I know it's what drew me. We begin to question what we have been taught, to see its limitations. We begin to explore more abstract concepts, including religions and philosophies. We question everything. Why are we here? Where are we going? What is the purpose and meaning of life? What lies beyond? Does anything lie beyond this life? What form might it take? What is love, justice, freedom? Are we each unique or are we interconnected? How? Why? Does something or someone direct us? Is there a God? For Theosophists, many of these questions are answered through patient and detailed study. In Isis Unveiled, The Secret Doctrine, and Key to Theosophy, H.P. Blavatsky delves into cosmogenesis, explaining in great detail the origin of all from an occult or esoteric perspective. Based on ancient wisdom she gathered through her lifetime, because Blavatsky herself yearned to know more, to have her questions answered, she traveled extensively in search of that which pointed to the true meanings behind what we have learned through physical science. In the book, Madame Blavatsky, Occultist by Josephine Ransom, she says of Blavatsky, quote, "She desired vehemently to understand and went both openly and secretly after any clue that would lead her to the knowledge she longed for. Gradually, as her insight became clearer, her classification of the occult became more definite. She discovered that one must go through almost unbearable, patient discipline, supported by unwavering aspiration to gain the exalted goal of self-realization, to that freedom of the self, which is the crown of all human existence." Close quote. Through her discourses on anthropogenesis and the three fundamental propositions, we learn of the oneness of all life, periodicity and cyclicity, and the pilgrim's path that all of us tread, carrying us from life to life as we gain insight and understanding. The study of Theosophy can be a lifelong endeavor. Many lifetimes, actually, and it touches all aspects of life, death, and that which lies beyond. Like Blavatsky herself, at some point, the true student of Theosophy, of the ancient wisdom, realizes that its study leads to more than just intellectual learning. Our study must touch every facet of our lives. It must touch the very essence of our being. We must sink our roots deep into the study outlined by Blavatsky, Alcott, Judge, Besant, and others as we strive toward universal consciousness. To, quote, "to gain the exalted goal of self-realization and freedom of the self," as Josephine Ransom said about Blavatsky. In the little book, The Doctrine of the Heart, Extracts of Letters from Indian Friends to Annie Besant, it says, "For the disciple, little is gained from teaching on the intellectual plane. The knowledge that infiltrates from the soul down in the intellect is the only knowledge worth having. And surely, as the days roll by, the disciple's store of such knowledge increases. And with the increase of such knowledge comes about the elimination of all that hinders him on the path." What of that path? In her famous quote, Blavatsky tells us, "There is a road, steep and thorny." Don't you love this quote? Mm-hmm. "There is a road, steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the very heart of the universe. I can tell you how to find those who will show you the secret gateway that opens inward only and closes fast beyond the neophyte forevermore. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through. There is no difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onwards, there is a reward past all telling, the power to bless and save humanity. For those who fail, there are other lives in which success will come, so you don't lose out. And the voice of the silence tells us, search for the paths, but, O Lano, be of clean heart before thou startest on thy journey, before thou takest thy first step to discern the real from the false, the ever-fleeting from the everlasting. Learn above all to separate head learning from soul wisdom. That's back to John's talk last night. The I from the heart doctrine. The voice goes on to say, but even ignorance is better than head learning with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it. This path is not for everyone. It is a strenuous journey to undertake. It requires dauntless courage, spotless purity, a strong intellect, a clean heart, the ability to discern the real from the false, and the ability to separate head learning from soul wisdom. This is a tall order that requires much preparation and a complete and total commitment to our goal. Self-realization, freedom of the self, universal consciousness. We can begin consciously at the emotional and mental levels of our being to gain the soul wisdom of which the voice of the silence speaks. As to head learning, study is the first of the three pillars of Theosophy, which are study, meditation, and service. We do need head learning. We do need our intellect, a strong intellect, but it is just a beginning, a base for what lies beyond. Our hearts must be clean and our aspirations pure before we begin. To get to that point takes courage and hard work. We must develop these qualities by working on them every day through our interactions with others. I once heard, well, this speaks to your meeting yesterday too, I once heard Radha say that the purpose of Theosophical lodges is for us to rub the rough edges off of each other. In our lodges, we organize, we plan, we sometimes disagree. We should expect to disagree and even argue at times. Our job is to learn from all that, to take a step back, ideally every day, and look at what has transpired and our part in it. We must examine our thoughts, our words, and our actions, paying attention to our part in the daily interactions of life. Then try again the next day to act and react in ways that reflect the highest within us. We must learn to be patient with others and with ourselves, allowing them and us to make mistakes. We must see these mistakes as just that, mistakes or missteps, and not assign any greater significance to them. We must not point fingers. We must learn to forgive others and ourselves as well for any mistakes we might make and to move on to a new day. It does no good to dwell on such things. All of this is true with the rest of our lives as well, not just within Theosophical lodges or the Theosophical Society, but at home and at work and in each and every situation we find ourselves, even interactions with strangers. We learn the lessons of a clean heart from everyone and everything. If we are diligent, we will have gained some semblance of understanding. We will progress with courage. We will have gained love for each other. The voice of the silence implies that from here we can enter the path with our eyes open. We are ready to learn to discern the real from the unreal, the everlasting from the ever-fleeting. The second pillar of Theosophy, meditation, can also help us to develop the qualities we need to enter the path. Through meditation, we can gain the sense of calmness and serenity we need to deal with the adverse situations that life brings to us. We can learn how to deal with and maybe even understand difficult people. It has been my experience that if I enter meditation holding a person with whom I'm having difficulties in my mind, while wishing for them their highest good, remarkable things can happen. The first time I tried this, a beneficial thing happened for the person with whom I was having difficulties that also took them out of my life. This was a neighbor, and it was one of those things where our children were fighting with each other, and it escalated and all of that. Her husband got a promotion. They moved out of the neighborhood. Everything was great for them, and I was ecstatic. I just thought that was great. I was delighted for myself and happy for them as well. That had worked so well that I tried it when another difficult situation presented itself, and the thought of how to resolve that situation came to mind. The third time I tried this method, I saw that it was my own behavior that was the problem, and I changed it. There are many methods of meditation. Through some, we concentrate on gaining insights into ourselves. Through others, such as loving kindness or meta meditation, we attempt to open our hearts and develop compassion for ourselves and others. Silent meditation on the breath, some object or a teacher or other who inspires us leads us toward no thought or emptiness or universal consciousness. In the Diamond Heart Book 2 by A.H. Almas, probably none of you have ever heard of him, I didn't before I read this. It says, excuse me, to see consciousness in its purity is to experience what we call universal consciousness. To experience the mind as pure consciousness. When you experience the mind as consciousness, it is also knowingness, the very element of knowing. It is difficult to describe what universal consciousness, or what the mind as consciousness means, because there are no thoughts in it. The moment there are thoughts, the content separates you from the consciousness. That's the quote. Because of this, we must experience universal consciousness to know what it is. In Universal Consciousness, the Diamond Heart Book 2 goes on to say, there is no experience, no experiencer, no self. The elimination of separateness, the elimination of discrimination. There is a complete non-differentiation. There is no separation, no two, and no thought that there is one. Is this the soul wisdom of which the voice of the silence speaks? It is quite likely its source. Where do we find it? How do we develop it? We have already said that we must go beyond the intellect, that we must have the courage to consciously change ourselves on the emotional and mental levels of our being, and that meditation can help us to reach the next level, the Buddhic level of our human constitution. Once one aspires to attain soul wisdom, he or she realizes that, as it says in the Doctrine of the Heart, quote, "The interest that we have in all the affairs of this elusive sphere belongs only to the emotions and the intellect, and cannot touch the soul. So long as we identify ourselves with the body and the mind, the vicissitudes which overcome the Theosophical Society, the dangers which threaten its life or its solidarity, must have a depressing, nay, sometimes almost a frenzied influence upon our spirits. But as soon as we come to live in the spirit, to realize the illusory nature of all external existence, the changeful character of every human organization, and the immutability of the life within, we must, whether the brain consciousness reflect the knowledge or not, feel an inward calm, an unconcernedness, as it were, with this world of shadows, and remain unaffected by the revolutions and eruptions of the world. Once the higher ego is reached, the knowledge that the laws and powers which govern the universe are infinitely wise becomes instinctive, and peace in the midst of outward throes is inevitable." That's the end of that quote. So it is the feeling of an inward calm, an unconcernedness, that lets us know we are moving towards soul wisdom, that we have touched upon universal consciousness. We feel a peace that outward events seem not to touch. As with unconsciousness of activity inherent on the physical level of our being, the spiritual level moves and grows unconsciously as well. It is our job to work ceaselessly through soul wisdom by consciously addressing our inward nature, thereby altering and improving what we think, say, and do in our lives. But the spiritual growth itself happens whether we are aware of it or not. Usually not. Wholehearted devotion to this process is required of those on the path, as well as trust that our efforts will bear fruit, that we will gain that to which Blavatsky herself aspired, the exalted goal of self-realization, that freedom of the self which is the crown of all human existence. How can the self be freed? One of my teachers once said that love is the realization of unity. The terms unity, universal consciousness, and oneness seem to me to be interchangeable. So we might say, as the Beatles said, that love is all there is. Universal consciousness, as universal love, is an expression of the harmony of all that is. There is no conflict because it contains no parts, no divisions, no separateness. It is pure consciousness, devoid of any thought or anything to rub up against. There is nothing to judge, nothing to weigh or measure, nothing to be prejudiced against or biased toward, nothing to fear. It is pure love, a love that accepts and encompasses everything and everyone impartially as a totality. If we are fortunate enough to touch this consciousness, even for a brief moment, we know that nothing else exists. There is no I, no ego, no personality, only pure consciousness, only pure love. We have spoken about the benefits of using the first two pillars of Theosophy, study and meditation, to help us to develop the soul wisdom that carries us along the path to universal consciousness. We have said that meditation can take us to the Buddhic level of our being, where we go beyond thought. Through our rooted nature, we also experience the generation of universal compassion, which helps us to identify with those who suffer and instills in us a desire to help. According to Buddhist teaching, compassion is the very essence of a spiritual life, and the main practice of those who have devoted their lives to attaining enlightenment. We have talked about watching our thoughts, words, and actions in relation to others and the circumstances in which we find ourselves. We must be ever vigilant if we are to tread the path to universal consciousness. We must not limit our self-improvement to those people or circumstances that are pleasing to us. In the words of N. Sri Ram, when we think of helping the world, of being brothers to all, we should remember that the world means also the unwanted who knock on our door at an inopportune moment. The people whom we may dislike for some reason, physical or mental. Those whose appearance or ways may be disagreeable to our tastes, and those of whom we might be ashamed if we were of that company. That's the end of that quote. Service, the third pillar of Theosophy, can be seen as the point of balance between study and meditation, through which we can give energy to Blavatsky's concepts of self-responsibility, ethics, and altruism. Those themes run through her works. Service is that part of the triad which allows us to demonstrate the divine in the world. Through selfless service, we help to heal suffering humanity. We draw attention to the woes of the world and lead by example in the effort to ease suffering and right wrongs. In the process, we help ourselves. We grow spiritually as we become more and more open to seeing the unity of life wherever we look. Service can manifest itself as simple acts of kindness performed by an individual or a group, or as larger and more organized efforts. It can be aimed at family members, a neighborhood, a community, a country, a gender, or other class of people, or at animals and even the planet. I recently attended a TS talk given by a member. She spoke of living a spiritual life. She talked about self-responsibility, ethics, and altruism, themes that ran through Blavatsky's works. In fact, Blavatsky said that these qualities are necessary for spiritual unfoldment, which she said is our goal, and that Theosophy is altruism. In fact, Blavatsky said that he who does not practice altruism, he who is not prepared to share his last morsel with a weaker or poorer than himself, he who neglects to help his brother man of whatever race, nation, or creed, whenever and wherever he meets suffering, and who turns a deaf ear to the cry of human misery, he who hears an innocent person slandered, whether a brother Theosophist or not, and does not undertake his defense as he would undertake his own, is no Theosophist. Later, these words from Annie Besant tied together Blavatsky's altruism, already a high ideal, with a sense of oneness alluded to in the Society's first object by saying, the spiritual man must lead a higher life than the life of altruism. He must lead, or she, must lead the life of self-identification with all that lives and moves. There is no other in this world. We are all one. Each is a separate form, but one spirit moves and lives in all. One heart, one breath, one world. Acts of altruism and compassion ran through Blavatsky's and Besant's lives. The story of Blavatsky feeling compassion for a young woman with children who could not afford a ticket to board the ship Blavatsky was sailing on is well known. HPB exchanged her first-class ticket for steerage class tickets for herself, the women, and her children, so they might travel too. Besant was a social activist long before she was even a member of the Theosophical Society. She worked for many causes, toward better working conditions and wages for laborers, and against child labor, and was even jailed for doing so. The first object of the Theosophical Society speaks of Universal Brotherhood, and in February 1908, Annie Besant founded the Theosophical Order of Service in response to members who wanted to put this concept into action in their daily lives. The TOS fosters a practical living application of theosophical principles and is a way to demonstrate and practice the oneness of all life. The giving of our times, talents, energy, money, advocacy, and moral support to those in need is based on compassion and on the acceptance of our responsibility toward those with whom we are one. Our TOS motto, a union of those who love in the service of all that suffers, reminds us of our commitment to the oneness of all life. Even before the TOS was formed, the Theosophical Society was no stranger to altruistic action. To working for the benefit of others, to leading the way toward improvement in people's lives. In a talk given in 2014, Diana Dunningham Chapelton reminded us, quote, "What is interesting, though, is that in those early days, the collective action of the members and their leaders actually caused the public to associate the society primarily with social reform. Early Theosophist magazines contained scathing commentaries on all kinds of social, educational, political, and religious abuses of the time. When Colonel Alcott appeared on theosophical platforms all over the world, he didn't lecture principally on metaphysics. He dealt mostly with such subjects as religious freedom, education for girls, cremation, and agricultural reform. These may seem innocuous to us now, but at the time, they were very controversial. For Mrs. Besant and her fellow pioneers, such as Colonel Alcott, William Quan Judge, Isabel Cooper Oakley, and Countess Wachtmeister, TS life and social responsibility were part of an indivisible whole. Some say that when Mrs. Besant created the TOS in 1908, it was to give an independent organizational focus for community involvement. But if this was the case, in practice, little distinction was made between the work of the TS and the TOS. Not much has changed today in that regard. Many of our members, whether individually, through TS, or as members of the TOS, give selfless, compassionate service to those in need. Within the TOS, such service is given not just from a humanitarian perspective, as it is in many other service organizations, but from the conscious perspective of the theosophical worldview, knowing that those we aid are part of the Universal Brotherhood of humanity, the unity, the oneness, universal consciousness. As Annie Besant said, the spiritual person must lead the life of self-identification with all that lives and moves. There is no other in this world. We are all one. Clearly, Blavatsky, Besant, and others understood universal consciousness, universal love. Their lives prove it, as they were shining examples of selflessness, generosity, and knowledge gained through such experience. As they trod the steep and thorny road, telling us over and over again what to do and how to do it. Verbally in their writings and by the way they live their lives. It is up to us to listen, to pick up on the nuances, to emulate their examples. It is up to us to see and understand that Theosophy is not just head learning, not solely study for the sake of learning facts and concepts. Can we really learn concepts? Know and understand them without putting them to use? We must live what we have learned. We must meditate on difficult concepts and ideas until we understand them, not just with our heads, but with our hearts and souls too. We must put into action that which we have learned. We must develop soul wisdom if we are truly to tread the path that leads to universal consciousness. For us as Theosophists, the path to universal consciousness is a blend of conscious study, meditation, and service that requires courage, a purity of life, constant effort and devotion to the work to gain unconscious spiritual growth. We must grow as the flower grows, as it says in the little book, Doctrine of the Heart. Keeping serene and passionless, there is no doubt that, as the days pass by, one is coming more and more within that influence which is the essence of life. And someday the disciple will be surprised to find he has grown wonderfully without knowing and perceiving the process of growth. For truly the soul, in its true blooming, grows like the flower, unconsciously, but gaining in sweetness and beauty by imbibing the sunshine of the Spirit. Thank you. Okay.
There's a price to be paid. Well, what she is talking about there, it's self-sacrificial service, and there's a price to be paid, isn't there?
I guess you could see it that way. Besant used to talk about duty and sacrifice, and those are things about that I have read that she has written that I don't like. Because to me, if you're going to do service or live your life, I mean, living your life is service, at least as far as I'm concerned. And if you're going to do that, I sure don't want to do it with a feeling that I'm missing out on something else or that I'm giving up something else. I want to do it with a feeling of joy. And to me, if you're not doing it, I shouldn't do that, sounds judgmental, but for myself, if I'm not doing it with a feeling of joy, then it doesn't mean anything. It's not worth it. Oh. Yes?
Is service to others a form of practical love, where love is the means of breaking the barriers to getting enlightenment? Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I understand that question. Thank you. It's kind of hard for me because it's like making something mechanical out of love. You're going to use love to break barriers, and to me it needs to be kind of an organic flow. The TOS has had two purposes. The first purpose is to help suffering humanity. Okay, fine. The second purpose is for the inner transformation, the spirit to aid the spiritual growth of the worker. At the same time, people have looked at those two purposes and said, well, wait a minute, this is selfish. You're doing it for yourselves. But the thing is, okay, we've got these two purposes, we are aware that they are there, but we're going to forget about the second one because we're just going to do it. And then we are going to grow as the flower grows unconsciously and just allow that process to take place without purposely trying to break barriers or however else you would want to put it. It's difficult to explain, but to me that's how it goes. Yes?
I'd like to put forward the idea that service, when you're totally immersed in the act of service, you're just unconscious of anything else and you're totally lost in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in my mind, is the closest that I can come to understanding what love is. Everything else is not.
It's just not,
all
you're right,
other
it's
things
not
aren't
there.
You're just totally immersed in that.
Yeah. And it's very hard for us as human beings in separate bodies to really, really, really understand the concept of oneness. Because we talk about doing something for our brother or sister, being your brother or sister's keeper, but eventually we need to get to the point where we do not think of ourselves as my brother's keeper. I am my brother. We're the same. There's no separation. There is no difference. We are one. There is a story that some of you may have read. It's called The Egg, and I can't remember the author's name. It's an American. But it's a short story, and in it he goes through this discourse. This man dies, and he's like gone to wherever he goes, and he's talking with this being who he identifies as God. But by the end of the discourse, this discussion that they're having, it turns out that there is only one being in the universe. They talk about, he asks, where do I go now? He said, well, I think you're going to be a servant girl in 500 BC. And he said, wait a minute, I can go back in time? He said, oh, there's no time. You're just, it's just everything is happening all together, and, there's not really any time. And you've been this, and you've been that, and all that, and everything. And he said, well, what about all of these other people? He said, oh, well, there's nobody else. You're the only one. But it's really a clever, good word. It's really a clever story. So, the definition of a martyr, just helping somebody is not martyrdom. You're not going to kill yourself for somebody else. We do need to be conscious of our health and our mental well-being. Put on your own oxygen mask before you help others, that kind of thing. We need to take physical care of ourselves and emotional care of ourselves. We don't want to be the shoemaker whose children have no shoes, that kind of thing. So you have to take care of yourself first, and once you're satisfied, and no one else has to be satisfied, once you're satisfied that you're doing that and that you're coming out of a good place and a healthy place, I would ignore them. They don't know they don't know who you are. They don't know you inside.
Best not to help people that don't want help, though, isn't
Yeah. Well, I certainly wouldn't. It's like the little boy who helped the old lady across the street, and then it turns out that she didn't want to go across the street. You don't want to push yourself on people.